So what else do we need to know? So obviously there's the integrity, there is good governance, and now as well, you've said we can develop ourselves by doing a board-specific accreditation. What else can we do to develop ourselves?
I think, is mentors, and this can be another woman in the industry. It can be a man in the industry, someone who sits on the boards or has experience at board level, and ask them, for support. Go to them for the questions you have and to support you in what you're looking for. And I think that's quite important, to have someone who can support you at that level, because the reality is we often have imposter syndrome, even when you have your first board position, and could be your fifth board position, where you sit there and you think, what do I really know? So it's about attaining that balance in yourself, that you're not going to know everything all the time. But if you're asking the right questions, if you are understanding of what is being put in front of you, if you are understanding of what makes for a good non-executive director, if you understand governance, and you're open to all of this, and you have strong values, and you're sitting on a board where your values align,
yes,
that's very important. And I think one of the things is we do struggle. We still have that syndrome of, is it all, we want to sit on a board, are we token? Is the culture one of, bad jokes and all the rest? How do we deal with that? And sometimes it takes time. I have met some amazing women who have sat on boards, and they go, I go into this. The culture of the board is very much male dominated as this. And sometimes I've actually I spoke to one lady the other day, and I put up my hand and I said, I like you guys, and I love the business, and I want to support this business strategically moving forward. But can we just stop? It was the swearing, yes. I think she was saying, is it necessary? And sometimes you just need to put yourself forward and make statements and create change yourself and support the change.
And I hear you, because I wanted to ask you, what are some of the challenges that women face on boards? But that would be typically it, because just the example you give, in my head, I'm like, if I say something, I'm going to be the aggressive woman. If I don't say something, I'm the compliant woman. Which one would you like to do? So it's kind of tough. What challenges do we face on boards?
Well, I think, the last thing you want to be is compliant, because the reality is that when, you're sitting in front of the Zondo Commission, no one's going to go, well, no, you didn't know, or, so you didn't want to ask. So we've seen enough of what the Zondo Commission tells us, what you don't want to be and what you don't, what an ideal director is not.
Yes.
And one of the things is voicing. Voicing your opinion, asking the questions, and it doesn't have to be in an aggressive way. I think as women, often we have an understanding of how we can approach matters. We don't have to be louder than the guy sitting next to us. We don't have to be more forceful, but we do need to ask, and we do need to create the change when there has to be. And it's not always easy. When you're coming into an environment that is very male dominated and maybe not so accepting of change, that's where the challenge lies. Then you can often be fighting your own corner, feel like you're fighting for your own corner. I found, though, with most of the companies that we work with, and certainly many of the boards that I have dealt with over the years, is there's a definite acceptance and a drive to bringing diversity of thought and bringing women into the boardroom. And the reason being is there's an understanding of the fact that women do bring change, and there's a positive outcome of having a woman on your board. Not just the fact that from yes, absolutely, women on boards create, you can see that there's increase in profit for the businesses.
Yes, not amazing.
Yeah, it's not rocket science. We see that there's a million reports that speak to it's great to have a woman on board. But essentially, it's the right thing to do. As a business and as an organization, in terms of efficiency, being ethical, all those good things, it makes sense to have a woman on the board, and it allows for greater representation, which we've spoken about. So it really is about bringing new knowledge, bringing new connections, and us as women understanding that value. And being able to stand to what one believes in as well.
That's incredibly meaningful. I almost feel like, is there a course for communication for women on boards and how to beat imposter syndrome? Because it sounds to me like those are two really large aspects of what we're seeing here.
So I think when you actually understand what you do bring to the table, and you've got a deeper understanding of what it is to be a non-executive director, it helps, because you're coming from a place of strength, of understanding, of confidence. So, go out and do the applied directorship program or understand some director program, because that's going to help you in knowing what you do. I've met many women over the years who sit on boards, and I mean, I remember speaking to someone in not that long ago, and she sat on many boards and she was doing the applied directorship program, and she said, I used to go into these modules, whether it was strategy, whether it was the effective leadership, whether it was the stakeholder engagement or risk management. I used to go into these modules going, I've got this nailed, like I've done this. And then she said, I'd walk out going, what was I doing on that board? So, we will always be learning. And
yes.
we will never stop learning. That's part of life, and it's fantastic. But yeah, it is a case about understanding what one can do within the boardroom space and what you offer. So, it'd be great to say, how do we learn not to have imposter syndrome? Or, how do we, but it is, at the end of the day, it's about how do we gain the confidence to know that it's okay to voice an opinion, and it's not necessarily wrong to be able to voice or ask a question.
Indeed. And now I have to, of course, dabble in Contribution Compass as well, because I know you guys use that. And I come from the strengths coaching perspective, but I adore Contribution Compass. I think they're lovely. And I think for me, there's almost understanding myself and understanding the board. And so your training plus something like a Contribution Compass or a strengths, so that imposter syndrome maybe is a little bit quietened down. I actually kind of hope we never ever lose it, because it forces us to strive to continually improve. But understanding, for example, in Contribution Compass language, I am a champion, I'm outspoken, I'm verbal. How do I bring that to the board in a way that makes sense?
Well,
instead of a mouth.
I am so glad you mentioned that, because that's part of understanding who you are and what you bring to any team, not just the boardroom. Because, and it's quite interesting. I think it was Harvard Business Review. They sort of felt that social diversity, and then we're talking about age, race, gender, wasn't enough, because boards were actually encouraged to look at professional diversity as well. Okay. So that's skills and expertise that we're talking about. You don't have to come from the industry. You might have an exceptional career history in terms of building business across Africa. And that's what the business is from a strategic perspective. At Sodago, we actually we take it a step further because we really believe that there is another dimension to boardroom diversity, and that's personal profiling. And that's where contribution comes in. Mm-hmm. Because we always say you can have 10 high performers sitting on a board. It doesn't mean it's a high performing board. Mm. And so at the end of the day, it is so key to have a board that is well balanced. And by well balanced, we're talking about the natural energy that everyone brings to the boardroom. Mm. Because you can have, and this is an impact, so you can have a board of 10, 8 people so risk averse that there is no opportunity to really drive the business forward from a strategic and big picture thinking level. And the reverse applies. Where you've got so many people shouting out the odds and what we can do and what we could do, and no one asking the hard questions about who's doing it, where the finance is coming from, and has anyone looked at the risk managing risk around this. So that's where contribution comes in. We're understanding what you bring and your decision-making process and your natural decision-making thoughts and approach within the space, because that is where you see, and then you can build on that, and you can actually take that as part of your bio and say, this is what I'm really strong at. Yes. I might be the people person. I might be have a really strong refining personality or profile, which is I look at the detail.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's about looking at that.
And so an interesting question that I have for you, and I mean, I could continue this conversation about the tools forever because I'm so involved with them, but I'm a bit aware of time. And there's one question I do want to ask you. I sometimes feel like being on a board is a status thing. People want to be on boards because it sounds good. My biggest concern about being on a board, and I'm sure it's this way throughout the world, is that if you're on a board, you carry that fiduciary duty and you actually stand, you stand in for what that board decides. So I've got to ask you, why the heck would someone want to be on a board other than status, given that it's such a high risk to go into a board, if it's not properly managed?
That's a very good point and a very good question. Because you really can be held personally liable. It's not this case of, oh yes, I want to be on 10 boards and I'm going to be fantastic. And there is the fiduciary duty, and there is, you can be held liable in these situations. So I think what's important, what we look for when we're actually looking at non-executive directors for positions, is why do you want to be on a board? What is your interest? And it's very, very important to understand that, because if it is purely monetary, you're not going to be the right person, to be honest. There has to be a need and a desire and a want to add value to that organization, to whether it be through your experience, your skills, your expertise, but it's to add value and see growth and sustainable growth for that organization and support that organization. So if you come from that perspective, where it's, I want to add value through what I've done, you're going to get the most from any board. And that comes down to when we were speaking earlier about the requirements, really, or the ideal director, with having the accountability, the responsibility, the competence, the integrity. Because you can't sit on too many boards. I see people all the time that, I just want to sit on boards and then that's what I'll do for a living. And they are professional non-executive directors, and they're very good at what they do. There are also some that aren't. So it's a case of, why do you want to do it? And you also need to understand that as well, because that's going to define how involved you get.
It reminds me of someone who once said to me, oh, I'm going to join this board. They only meet 3 times a year. So the only time I have to show up is for a couple of hours 3 times a year. And I was just like, what about the prep and, the commitment? And I'm not even speaking about being part of the business. I'm just thinking of, surely you need to know more and be aware of industry trends and things like that. So there's got to be more to it than that.
You're never not on duty as a director. You may only be meeting, 3 times a year, or 4 times a year, or bi-monthly. But your responsibility doesn't change. Your responsibility doesn't disappear when you're not when you're not going to a board meeting that month. It could be that you see something in the industry or the market. So you've got to be, you've got to be playing an active role, even though it is not an active role on a day-to-day basis. It's not an operational role. It's not a management role, but it is still understanding that business and looking to take that business forward.
So, Beverley, I know we're supposed to finish up, but I just have one more question for you. This is riveting. I love this stuff. For someone who's never sat in a board, how do we define who's leading the company between the board and our executive?
So it's a good question. And I think sometimes new boards actually struggle with that a lot. And that when you come and sit on that board, you're not getting the most out of the board, and you're not getting the most out of your learning. So at the end of the day, the board, so management, will report into the board. Everyone is equal in the boardroom. So you might have executive directors that are shareholders, and they sit around the table, and they may very well often feel that they have the majority say. But the reality is that in a boardroom, there is no one has more say than another. So you have an independent chairman or chairman, that might be an executive, who manages the agenda, manages the board, but essentially everyone has a right and an opinion and a say. And that's often the danger we have. When you're an enterprise and you're growing and you're now like, okay, we want to take steps and we want to have a board and want to do this. It's difficult sometimes for founders and for entrepreneurs to go like, oh, actually, I can't say it's going to happen and it's going to happen, and even in family-owned organizations, it is a challenge. There is a real challenge, but the benefits, and this is why I love what I do, the benefits of seeing a well-performing board and a high-performing board and a board that's really balanced, the difference it makes to that business and that organization as it develops and grows is fantastic, because you are getting an input that you didn't have before, and that input is absolutely invaluable.
Awesome. Oh, I love that, because I love making people happy at work. And for me, that happiness comes down to purpose and fulfillment at work. And I think the right board can help steer the company in the right direction for that to happen.
Absolutely.
Beverley, thank you so much for taking the time to chat today. It has been so great. I'm sure I could keep going for another 3 hours, but I'm sure you have like a real job that you need to get to. So, let me not hold you back from that. Thank you so much. And thank you for the offer of letting people reach out and get hold of your report. I will include your email in the session notes as well.
Much appreciated. And it's lovely chatting with you. Have a fantastic rest of the day.
Thank you so much, Beverley. Appreciate it. So, everyone, I hope that you all enjoyed our time with Beverley. Wow, I could ask so many more questions. I seem to be gotten stuck on this topic of boards. We're going to have to look into that. And if you enjoyed this, as always, if you're on YouTube, please subscribe and then hit the notification bell so that you know when the next episode is up. If you found us in LinkedIn and Facebook, we're glad to have you here. So please like, share, comment, ask questions. I'm sure we're going to get everyone back that's ever spoken to us to answer any of your questions. But until then, I look forward to seeing you at the next performance feedback.